Carrickfootball.com.au, another edition of Local Law, and today's subject is a great one because when evolution's taken place in local football, this man's name is usually linked to it, whether it be a GDFL club making its way into the GFL becoming Football Geelong, or Football Geelong becoming AFL Barwon. This man has seen it all, and it's great to be talking with Peter Kelly on Carrickfootball.com.au's Local Law. Cal, welcome. You've had a wonderful history in football. It stretches back more than 50 years, but your name seems to be linked to so many changes in football. Is it fair to say that you just seem to be in the right place at the right time?
Firstly, Tom, thanks for the invitation to come along. Probably not. I embrace change, and generally when there's opportunities to improve, it does include change. And I've been fortunate that wherever I've been involved in both my professional life at Ford and certainly in the community role with football, that there's always been opportunities to improve the structures that are about. So yeah, changes come along all the time, but for the right reasons.
You're linked obviously to two clubs, Lara most recently and obviously St Albans in the early days, but a lot of people don't realise that St Mary's was your first footy club.
Yeah, juniors there. In those days it was St Mary's Tech and St Mary's Footy Club. Being from out Newcombe Way, I was at the St Mary's Tech school, so you play with the Tech sides, but there was a link between the Tech and the Footy Club, St Mary's Footy Club. But at the end of your 15s career, you had the choices: just go and play where you wanted to, or it was up to the St Mary's Footy Club to keep you there. But I reminded Donny quite often that he let me go, and that was a regret of his for the rest of his life.
I was going to mention that. That would have been the first crossing of paths with your great mate Don Matheson, who we know obviously is the legend of local football and a man that hopefully one day we'll have on Local Law.
Yeah, look, you could hear him talking in his raspy voice in the background, even when you're there at junior training. He was there all the time, and yeah, we have a bit of a joke about it often enough, and it's all good fun.
St Albans was at the natural club, being out from that eastern suburbs region that you'd go to after you decided to leave St Mary's?
Yeah, it was a bit of a funny one, that one, Tom. I lived up the top of the hill near the old water tower, and Thompson and St Albans were the two closest. My young brother Mick was at Thompson, and so I thought, I'm not going over there to play with him. I ventured down to St Albans, which was straight down Boundary Road, probably an easier ride on the pushy than going to Thompson. So that's why I went there. And
a bit of success there, especially in the early 70s.
Yeah, I started under 18s. We had a couple of grand final appearances, didn't win it, but then I went into the senior side in the following year, first year. Peter Manerick was coach then, first stint for the Bear. And we were fortunate enough to pick up back-to-back Woolworth Cups, which is the district league relative to the GFL in those days.
Yep. Yeah. And was there a move to Evelynhurst as a result of that for St Albans, winning those couple of Woolworths? That
was 71 too. My first senior year was 1970. We played grand final against Drysdale out at North Geelong, and that was the day Bull Bennett tried to kill me. He did a pretty good job, but I actually got up. And then the following 2 years, we played in the grand final and won them. And then 73, St Albans went into the Evelynhurst comp, which is now GFL.
You obviously ended up out at Lara, and Lara became a real passion of yours. What took you out to Lara?
I had my then wife, her family was from Lara. I put in for the coaching job at the reserves coaching job at St Albans in 76, at the end of 75. I could see things are happening. You know, if you lose pace in GFL, they make you look bad, and I was never quick. Yep. I was slow. The thing that kept me going was, in those competitions was just a bit of true grit and determination, as against people with total class like an Alec Risen or a Gordon Hines or somebody like that. Anyway, I put in for the reserves coaching job, didn't get it, so I was a bit grumpy. Form dropped off, and as it turns out, I worked with a bloke by the name of Conrad Vinken, who was then Secretary of Lara. We were in the same design office at Ford, and he was true blue to the, read the Addy every morning, every Sunday morning, Friday morning, I'll get it right. Read the teams, and there's Kelly omitted it. So I got to work, and the clearance form was already on the desk. So we had a quick chat, and I thought, oh yeah, look, I'm happy to move on and just put the toe in the water somewhere else.
Okay.
And Lara was the obvious choice if I wanted to go to somewhere else and regather the career, so to speak. So that's when I went there mid '76. Yeah.
Did you ever anticipate that would become a love affair with the Lara Football Club, that you would become so ingrained in the culture out there?
No, not so, none at all. When I first got there, the grandstand was the only facility there socially. There was no, at the back of that's now the old Geelong Soccer Club change rooms, which is a gym, but no, the grandstand was a standalone social room. The change rooms that are there now, the old grey ones, they were there, but they were state of the art. And they had one training light, which was only a telephone pole. I reckon it was a 100-watt globe. And I went out there the first training night, and of course, come 5:30, it's dark and no one's there. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Because, GFL or Evelyn Hurst in those days, you're on the track at bit after 5, having a kick to kick, and then, getting full tilt back into it by 5:30, 5:45. There's no one there. Anyway, I thought, what the hell have I done? Is this the right decision or not? But as time went by, they're a good bunch of people, terrific bunch of people. They were very much a bush club. That's no disrespect to anybody out there. They were still, happy to play their community footy. There was no major ambitions to win at all costs, sort of thing. And so I just settled in, and after a couple of 6 months, 12 months, I enjoyed it and settled right into it. Eventually moved out there. We were living out East Geelong then, so.
So much so you loved it that you became, by the early 80s, you were president of the club.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting little journey in itself. But in '78, they appointed Barry Collins as senior coach, and I applied for the reserve grade job and got that as well. So from '78, '79 and '80, Colo and I coached. Now, he was a huge inclusion into the club because, Barry played Evelyn Hurst premierships at 18, 17, 18 at North Geelong. And he was there in their really successful window. So Colo's doing the seniors and I did the reserves, and we had a lot of success. The seniors were probably knocked about more so because that was when they did the split between the Evelyn Hurst and Woolworth competition, when Donny and his faceless men put together the Geelong Footy League comp.
Yep.
And the District League, Geelong and District Football League, retained that title, but the Evelyn Hurst and Woolworth Cup competitions then became GFL and Geelong and District. So during that process of establishing the GFL, there were 3 sides weren't included in the GFL. That was East Geelong, St Peters and Geelong West.
Yep.
Now, that meant that the Geelong and District sides, the old Woolworth teams, had to play against 3 Evelyn Hurst GFL teams or clubs. And first year Colo, the seniors played against Blue West, who went through premiers and champions, both divisions. The reserves played them in the grand final. The following year, the seniors played against East Geelong in a prelim, and that was the Carlon crew, if you remember the Carlon crew at East Geelong. Lara won, and then they played, I think they played St Joey's in the grand final and lost that one as well. So Barry Bezer was pretty stiff that he came up against these 2 heavyweights 2 years on the trot. The reserves won 79, and then 80 was another year where they both seniors were runners up again, I think.
Yeah.
And the reserves finished in the prelim. So I finished then, did my knee, and played another year in '82, and then took over the chairmanship or the presidency from Graham Quick as a playing president. That was good.
from there, obviously there hadn't been a great deal of senior success out at Lara, but you were able to snag, I think, 86 a GDFL flag. Is that when the wheels started turning in motion for, hang on, it might be time for us, growing population, we might be able to compete with the big boys again?
Yeah, look, it was a bit of a journey. My 3 years, 82, 3, 4, 82, 3, 4, was a consolidation. 80, I think about 81, Barry didn't want to coach, and he left, and then I can't remember who got the job, but in 82, I thought we'd better go back to Colo, just for that strong leadership skill that he had, and consolidate. So we did that. At the end of 84, I'd done 3 years, and it was a bit hard. The GDFL in those days had Div 1, Div 2, and it was tough to get up to the top and stay there. And one year, I think it might have been 84, that Lara were probably in the bottom 4 and struggling for that momentum. We're never really in contention for relegation because it was promotion and relegation, Div 1, Div 2. Played at Anarchy in one of the last games and won, and that really consolidated them in that Div 1 comp. But then we needed to look at what was going to happen beyond that. At the end of 85, I thought, no, I better give somebody else a go, and John Young took over, and they appointed a bloke by the name of Greg Wilson from St Mary's. And Greg was a very, very strong-minded person, clear ambitions and coaching, very good coach. Yep. We had a very successful year and got done in the grand final. I think Werribee Central beat us. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of young guys coming through, Alfie Clark, Terry Green, Phil Cullen, Kevin Dover. These guys that were the young backbone of Lara, Paul Matheson, plus the recruits that were moving into town. That was just when outsiders were moving into Lara. And the thought was that if we don't have an ambition or a vision to improve, then we'll lose these players, to the GFL clubs. Bell Park, St Mary's were hovering with Jock McMahon, and Jock actually put a proposal to Lara and me that St Mary's or Lara becomes a feeder club to St Mary's. Obviously, good on Jock for that. Yeah. He could see Bruce Lancaster had played and coached at Lara and was at St Mary's, and he was probably the conduit to make that option available to Lara. So anyway, we decided, no, Jock, we'll do it ourselves. And we thought, no, we're going to be poached here. We're going to be breeding ground for North Shore, Northern Suburb clubs, and St Mary's, of course. So 87 runners up. That was when we started talking to Don Matheson and Neville. Neville was president of the District League then. Just about what their thoughts and what the process would be if ever we decided to move into the GFL. Because
by this stage, obviously, the promotion relegation that had existed through the first half a dozen years had finished, hadn't it? I think it finished with St Joseph's being the last club to be automatically, was it? And then right. MOs went up as well?
Yeah, it was a 3-year window.
Yep.
And Joey's were in there once, Model was the other one, and MOs were the last. And I was talking to Darryl McClure last Saturday, who was the president of AMOs, Geelong Amateur, when that happened.
Yep.
Now, that had finished in 86. 85 was their last premiership.
Yep.
They went up in 86. Now, ironically, at the end of 88, they found that they weren't competitive. So Lara had won premiers and champions. In the seniors, lost the grand final for premiers, champions in the reserves. Under 18s were premiers. So it was all there. And Geelong Amateur, and we were having a lot of talks with them too about the difficulties involved and so on. And Darryl and his committee had decided, no, we were going to leave the GFL and go to the District League.
Yep. Which
created a vacancy, and Donnie Matheson, through the work that we'd done, and his executive acknowledged that they'd give Lara the opportunity to join the GFL. So that's how that all happened. at the end of '88 for '89.
You became the 10th club in the GFL.
We were the 10th.
Yep.
Well, we were the 10th of a 10 anyway,
Yeah.
because Geelong Amateur had gone back to the District League. They played a few years and then went Ballerine.
It was a fair summer of upheaval because you obviously had West and St Peters merging and becoming obviously
Yeah.
the West Saints at the time, and
Yeah.
Ammo's going back. A lot took place in a very small period of time, and then the following 12 months you saw Barwon and Belmont merge as well. It was a real, I suppose, uncertain period for a lot of clubs around that time.
Yeah, it was for Geelong West especially because they were VFA. They'd been playing in the VFA association comp. Well, what, for 50 years? And for them, they'd become non-competitive, especially their reserves. They had no depth because they were fed from originally Geelong reserves. Tim College and all those guys would go over there when they'd finished their career at Geelong and Geelong reserves. But there was no reserves. No player. They always wanted to play the local football club rather than go and play reserves at VFA level.
Yep.
Travel all over the Melbourne and
go
so
to
on.
Waverley or Camberwell
and Frankston and all those places. So it was a big thing for them. And at the same time, you mentioned St Peters, then amalgamated with Geelong West to become Geelong West St Peters, and Greg Welsh was part of that. That was the other side that Colo lost to was St Peters in one of his grand finals.
Yep.
And Turtle was president of St Peters, and they had a good side. He did a lot of good work, and they went from the District League into the GFL through that promotion system.
And played in the grand final in
Played
their
in
first
the
year.
grand final first year, and they had some ripper players there, Friend and
Young John Pickering.
Yeah, young John Pickering.
Hannon.
The Hannon boys were there.
Yep.
Sells.
Yep.
Yeah, Steve Sells. So they had a pretty good side, and Lara played Geelong West St Peters in the first game, and they went in with red and white stripes, like North Melbourne red and white. I mean, the vertical, not like North Melbourne. Yeah. Which was a real indicator to everybody, how these two new clubs going to go. And I think it was about an 8-point victory to West Saints. So that was a peg in the ground for us. We won 5 in the first year, which was unheard of. One of the difficulties we had was getting a coach. Greg Wilson had coached '88, didn't want to go on because he knew from his St Mary's days, his background was St Mary's, played flag stuff down there. The challenges that were ahead, and he didn't know whether he had the energy. We couldn't get a coach. So I had to go back to him and say, what do you reckon? We're desperate. It's November, nearly December, and we can't, because history said it's no point, there's no advantage in coaching a side that's come from District League into the GFL as far as success goes, and not going to look good on your CV if you put that down. So you just couldn't get anybody to do it. So Greg did it there. We won 5 games, beat Bell Park in the last home and away. And that was, the momentum was good. The town were behind us. Because before we went, we surveyed all the town with a written submission. The under-18s were given that job. You go and talk to everybody in the town, go around the cars every home game, and if they haven't filled it in, get them to fill it in. Home and away clubs, it didn't matter if they weren't Lara supporters. What do you think? So we did a fair bit of homework. And when the decision was needed to be made, it was a done deal. It was a foregone conclusion. '87, Donnie came into the Lara rooms. We played at North Geelong. And he said, what do you think? And I said to him, no, we're not going to go. This is on the assumption we're going to win, or win the grand final, or even runners up. And he said, you're right. I support you. At the end of '88, we were premiers and champions, unbeaten through to the grand final. And I'd spoken to him a couple of weeks before and said, look, we're going to have a crack. Win, lose or draw. So he said, yeah, time's right, because he knew amateurs were talking about it. So what the difficulty was getting on-field personnel, more so the coaching staff. And then the end of '88, Greg I spoke to him with about 3 or 4 weeks to go in the home and away, and he said, no, I definitely aren't going on. So I started to look around, and there was one bloke in the system, Damien Christensen. And Chriso had been at Geelong.
Yep.
A very, what would you call it, respectful a VFL career.
Yep.
Played seniors and did a really good job. Total footy nut. I started to put the feelers out with him. He was playing Werribee, VFA then. I think he might have been coaching staff. First time round, no, not interested. And I wasn't convinced that he was convinced that he wasn't interested.
Yeah.
So
you needed to hear no a few more times.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I got a few.
Yeah.
And then one day, this is a true story. I used to go to church in those days. And we played a home game, and he came to the game and said, I said, what are you going to do? Are you giving it any more thought? He said, no, I'm definitely not interested. So, that's the end of my decision. I'm not going to go. So I did go to church. That Saturday night in those days, you could duck away from the footy club. And I'm driving home, and I thought, I'm going to have another crack at this bloke. He hasn't convinced me yet.
Yep.
And I rang his place, no mobiles in those days, and Alan answered, his dad. And I said to him, Damien, no, he's not here because he's a policeman. And I told him the story. He said, leave it with me. So the next day, I'm out watering my veggie patch out at Lara, at home, and the cop car pulls up, and it's Damien. He said, I've had a think. I'd like to do it. So, I was ready to kiss and cuddle a rose bush or a tomato bush or whatever I was watering. Yeah. So we basically signed a contract over watering the veggie patch and shook hands, and that was the deal. And from that moment on, the whole place just buzzed.